She walked her 2 children to school in shoes that had stopped being waterproof 3 winters ago, wore her grandmother's coat because it was the only one that still had both buttons, and carried lunch money in exact change because there was no room for approximation. He sat in the back of a black sedan worth more than her entire block, closed a $200 million deal before his coffee cooled, and had not set foot on a sidewalk in longer than he could remember. The car hit the puddle without slowing. Brown water rose in a wall and came down across her coat, her daughter's backpack, her son's face. Neither of them knew that this street, this exact block of cracked concrete, had already connected them 35 years ago. Evelyn had been up since 4:45. Not because she wanted to be, because the math required it. 2 children dressed fed and walked 1.3 miles to Greystone Elementary by 7:15, meant leaving the house by 6:30, meant lunches packed by 6, meant clothes ironed by 5:30, meant standing in the kitchen in the dark at 4:45 with the overhead light off. Because the bulb had gone out 11 days ago and a replacement was not in this week's envelope. She made the lunches by the blue glow of the stove clock. 2 sandwiches, peanut butter on both. She spread it thin, because the jar was down to the curved edges where the knife had to work harder, and she would not buy another until Friday when the second paycheck came through. She cut each sandwich diagonal because Amara had once told her that triangles tasted better than rectangles, and Evelyn had not questioned this because it cost nothing to cut at an angle and her daughter's certainties were worth preserving. She wrapped the sandwiches in the same plastic bags she had washed and dried the night before. She placed 1 apple in each bag. She counted out the coins for milk money, 60 cents per child, $1.20 total. She had the coins in a small jar on the counter, and she counted them out the way she counted everything, carefully, with the specific attention of a person who understood that there was no margin between enough and not enough. The coat she put on was her grandmother's, dark green wool too wide in the shoulders. It hung on her the way coats hang on people they were not made for. But it was warm and it was whole, and those 2 qualities were sufficient for any garment in November. She had stopped noticing the size of it. The children had not. Amara had once said, quiet and without judgment, the way Amara said most things, "Mama, that coat makes you look like you are inside a tent." Evelyn had laughed. She had laughed hard, the kind of laugh that comes when you are tired enough that everything is either funny or terrible, and you choose funny. Tobias came downstairs first. He was 5, and he moved through the world with the specific energy of someone who had not yet been taught to conserve it. He stood in the kitchen doorway in his school clothes, shirt buttoned wrong, and he looked out the window at the rain and said, "How come it rains every day?" Now Evelyn fixed his buttons without answering, because the answer was November, which was not a satisfying answer to a 5-year-old who wanted rain to have a reason. Amara came down 4 minutes later. She was 8, and she moved differently from her brother. She moved the way Evelyn moved, efficiently, without wasted steps. She picked up her lunch bag without being told. She put on her shoes without being asked. She looked at her mother's face the way she always did in the morning, reading it, checking it, making a quiet calculation about what kind of day it was going to be based on what she found there. She did not ask for anything she did not see already packed. She had learned this without being taught. Children learn the edges of what is available the way water learns the shape of its container, without being told where the walls are. They just stop reaching past them. Evelyn wiped Tobias's shoes with a damp cloth by the front door. The shoes were a size too big, bought that way on purpose because he was growing, and because buying shoes once was better than buying shoes twice. She stuffed a small piece of newspaper into each toe the way her grandmother had done for her when she was small. The paper would be wet by the time they reached the school. She knew this. She did it anyway. They walked out into the rain at 6:32. No umbrella. The one they had was broken along 2 ribs, and Evelyn had decided that holding a broken umbrella was worse than holding nothing, because a broken umbrella was a promise it could not keep. They walked close together. Tobias held her left hand. Amara walked slightly ahead on the right, close enough to be with them far enough to feel like she was leading. The street did not have a proper sidewalk on this stretch. They walked along the edge of the road where the asphalt crumbled into gravel and the gravel gave way to mud. Cars passed. Some slowed. Most did not. Evelyn walked on the traffic side. She always walked on the traffic side. This was not something she thought about. It was something her body did, the way bodies do things that are built from the specific mathematics of love and fear combined. They passed the telephone pole on the corner of Greystone and Maple. A notice was stapled to it, white paper in a plastic sleeve, already beginning to wrinkle from the rain. Demolition notice. Greystone block. Evelyn looked at it. She read the words she had already read 3 times this week. She kept walking. Tobias asked what it said. She told him it was nothing important. At the school, she walked them to the entrance. She fixed Tobias's collar one more time. She looked at Amara, and Amara looked back at her, and between them passed the specific silent communication of 2 people who understand each other well enough to say everything without speaking. Then Evelyn went around to the side entrance, the one marked Staff Only, and she went in, and she put on her apron, and she began preparing the breakfast trays for the cafeteria. 237 students, most of them on the free meal program. She worked the line with 2 other women, and when the children came through, she served them their portions, and she did not say much, but when a child came through whose tray looked too empty, or whose eyes moved across the food with the specific hunger of someone who had not eaten since yesterday, she added more. A second scoop, an extra carton of milk placed without comment on the corner of the tray. She did not make a show of it. She did not draw attention to it. She did it the way it had always been done for her, quietly, and without requiring the child to be grateful for something they should not have had to need. That same morning, at 7:14, Harrison Devereaux was in the back seat of a black sedan moving through the city in the opposite direction. The car was a Mercedes. The windows were tinted. The interior smelled like leather, and the particular absence of smell that belongs to things that are cleaned daily by someone who is paid to make them invisible. Jerome, his driver, had picked him up at 6:45 from the house in the Garden District, a house with 7 bedrooms, 4 of which had not been entered in months. Harrison lived in a house built for a family and occupied by a man, and a silence that had settled into the rooms the way dust settles into places no one walks through. He was on the phone. He had been on the phone since the car pulled away from the curb. Reginald Pace, his development partner, was walking him through the week's agenda. There was the Greystone project. The commercial zone approval had come through from the city planning office 3 weeks ago. The demolition permits were finalized. 42 residential properties in the Greystone block east side were scheduled for clearing beginning December 1st. Reginald mentioned the community pushback. Some residents had filed objections. A few had gone to the press. Reginald said the word manageable. He said it the way people in business say things that affect other people's lives. With distance. With the specific fluency of someone who has learned to discuss displacement as logistics. Harrison said, handle it. 2 words. He said them while looking at his phone, scrolling through the morning's numbers, not looking out the window. He did not ask who had filed the objections. He did not ask how many families lived in those 42 properties. The information was available to him. He had not requested it. The car moved through the central business district, glass and steel. The buildings Harrison had built or financed or competed against. The skyline he had helped shape over 30 years of work that had turned a boy from the east side into a name on the side of buildings. He did not think about the east side. He had not thought about it directly in years. It existed in him the way a scar exists, present, visible if you looked, but covered by enough layers that looking was no longer necessary. Jerome turned onto the avenue that ran east toward the bridge. The rain was steady now, the kind of November rain that does not come down hard but does not stop. Harrison looked up from his phone for a moment, and his eyes went to the window without intention. Outside, the city moved in its morning way. Commuters, buses, a man running across the street holding a newspaper over his head, and then a child, walking on the edge of the road. Small, maybe 6 or 7, a backpack too large for the body carrying it. No umbrella, the rain falling on the child's head with the even indifference rain has for everyone. Harrison looked at the child for exactly 1.5 seconds. Something moved through him. Not a thought. Something older than a thought. Something that lived in the part of the brain that stores things the conscious mind has agreed to stop visiting. He turned back to his phone. He did not know that in 7 minutes his car would turn onto the road where Evelyn was walking. He did not know that Jerome, who drove carefully but quickly, because Harrison did not like to be late, would hit a puddle at the intersection of Greystone and Maple. At the precise moment, a woman and 2 children were walking along the edge, where the asphalt met the mud. He did not know any of this yet. He was reading an email about a property in Midtown. He was drinking coffee that had been handed to him at the curb by a woman whose name he had not asked. He was sitting in the back of a car that cost more than Evelyn's annual salary, moving through the same rain, breathing the same November air, less than 2 miles from the street, where he had once walked to school himself in shoes that did not fit. The distance between those 2 facts was everything. The distance was also nothing. On the 1st of every month, an anonymous wire transfer left an account Harrison kept separate from the rest of his finances. It went to a scholarship fund for children on the east side of the city. He had set it up 11 years ago. He had never visited the fund. He had never spoken to the administrators. He had never asked how many children it served or what their names were. He sent the money the way people send money when they are trying to pay for something they cannot name and are not ready to look at directly. Jerome did not ask about the transfer. No one did. It was the one thing Harrison did that existed outside the architecture of his public life, and he intended to keep it that way. The car turned onto Greystone Road. Jerome accelerated slightly through a stretch of standing water that had pooled where the storm drains were clogged. The tires sent a sheet of brown water rising off the pavement. It went wide. It went high. It went across the crumbling edge of the road where 3 people were walking. Jerome saw it happen in the mirror. He said, quiet and automatic, "Sorry about that." Harrison did not hear him. He was typing a reply to Reginald about the Greystone timeline. His thumbs moved across the screen. The car kept moving. The rain kept falling. Behind them on the road, a woman was wiping mud from her daughter's backpack with the sleeve of a coat that was already too big and now also too wet. 2 blocks later, Harrison put his phone down. Not because of the puddle, because the email was sent. He looked up and Jerome's eyes were in the rearview mirror, and there was something in them, not judgment. Jerome was not the kind of man who judged his employer. It was something closer to a quiet record being kept. Harrison said what Jerome said. "Nothing, sir. Just a puddle back there. Hit a woman walking with her kids. Got them pretty good." He said it evenly. "The way you report a minor incident. A woman walking with her kids." The words landed on Harrison at a delay, the way certain words do when they trigger something the listener has not given permission for. A woman walking with her kids. The sentence sat in the car between them, and Harrison felt his hand stop halfway to the coffee cup. A specific memory arrived. Not requested. Not welcome. His mother. 35 years ago. Walking him to school in the rain. Her hand gripping his. Her shoes, the ones with the sole coming away from the left toe, making a specific sound on wet pavement. She had looked down at him and said something he had never forgotten, even though he had spent considerable effort trying. She had said, "Don't look down, just keep walking." He had been 7. She had been 29. She had been walking him to school because the bus did not come to their block, and because she did not have a car, and because she did not have a choice. She had been wearing a coat that did not fit her properly. He sat in the back of the Mercedes, and the memory was there, and he could not make it leave. He looked at the rearview mirror. Jerome's eyes. He looked out the window, the road behind them wet gray, already empty of the people they had passed. He sat with it for 4 seconds. He almost let it go. He almost went back to the phone, back to the email, back to the version of the morning where this was a minor incident involving a puddle. Then he said, "Turn around." He said it in a voice that did not sound like his own. Lower, quieter. The voice of someone reaching for something underneath the version they had been performing. Jerome did not ask why. He had worked for Harrison for 9 years, and he was good at knowing when silence was the correct response. He checked the mirror and made a U-turn on the empty stretch of road and drove back toward the intersection of Greystone and Maple. Harrison saw them from half a block away. The woman had stopped walking. She was standing on the crumbled edge of the road, with one hand on the boy's shoulder and the other wiping the girl's backpack with something, a cloth, a sleeve. He could not tell from this distance. The rain was falling on all three of them with the specific patience rain has when it knows it has all morning. He told Jerome to stop the car. Jerome pulled to the curb. Harrison looked at the scene through the tinted window. The woman, the children, the coat too big, the shoes too worn, the mud across the girl's bag, and the front of the boy's jacket. He opened the door. He stepped out into the rain. His shoes hit the wet pavement. Italian leather hand-stitched polished that morning by someone in his household. They were immediately wet. He stood there on the edge of the road in his suit in the rain and walked toward them. Evelyn heard him before she saw him. Footsteps behind her. She turned with the automatic alertness of a woman who walks this road every morning and knows what it means when someone approaches from behind. She saw the car first. Black, long, expensive. Then the man, tall, gray at the temples, a suit that cost more than 6 months of her rent. He stopped 3 feet from her, the distance people keep when they are not sure whether they are welcome. He said, "I am sorry. That was my car. I did not see you." Evelyn looked at him. She looked the way Amara looked at her in the mornings, reading, measuring, taking the quiet inventory of a person who has learned that apologies from strangers in expensive suits are sometimes real and sometimes a performance, and that telling the difference requires patience. She said, "We are fine." She said it flat. Not cold, not warm. The tone of a woman who has been fine through things that were not fine and who does not require a man she has never met to confirm or deny it. He stood there. The rain was on both of them now. It did not care about the suit. He looked at her shoes. Worn at the heels, the stitching pulling away from the sole on the left foot. He looked at his own shoes. He did not say anything about what he saw, but something moved across his face. Tobias looked up at the car, then up at the man, then back at the car. He was 5. He processed things in the order they impressed him. The car was bigger than anything on their street. Amara was watching the man's face. She was 8, and she watched faces the way some children watch animals. With interest and without fear. She said, "Your car is really big." Harrison looked at her. She said, "My grandma used to say people with big cars are either very important or very lost." The sentence landed in the November air between all of them and stayed there. Harrison did not answer immediately. He looked at this girl, 8 years old, standing in the rain, with mud on her backpack. Looking at him with an expression that was not impressed and not hostile and not asking for anything, an expression that was simply clear, the way water is clear. He said, "Your grandmother sounds like a smart woman." Amara said she was. The past tense sat in the rain with the rest of it. Evelyn put her hand on Amara's shoulder, not pulling her away, just present. She said, "Thank you for coming back. You did not have to." She said it the way she said most things, without extra, without less. She turned, and she took Tobias's hand, and Amara fell in beside her, and the 3 of them walked toward the school entrance. Harrison stood on the side of the road and watched them go. The woman in the coat that was too large. The boy whose shoes were too big. The girl who had just said something to him that he understood he was going to carry for a long time without fully knowing why. He looked down at his shoes, mud along the toe, water darkening the leather. He stood there in it. He did not move toward the car. He did not check his phone. For the first time in longer than he could calculate, he had the specific feeling of standing on the wrong side of something he had not yet been able to name. He looked at the telephone pole on the corner, the notice in the plastic sleeve, demolition notice, Greystone block, his company's project, his signature on the permits. He read the notice. He read it again. He looked at the direction Evelyn and her children had walked. He got back in the car. Jerome said nothing. The car pulled away from the curb. Harrison did not pick up his phone. He sat in the back seat with his wet shoes and his wet suit and a sentence a girl had said to him in the rain that he could not stop hearing. People with big cars are either very important or very lost. He did not know which one he was. That was new. Harrison's office was on the 22nd floor of a building he owned. Glass walls, a desk the size of a small car, a view of the city that made everything below look manageable, reducible, the kind of view that turns neighborhoods into parcels and people into the absence of people. He had been sitting at his desk for 40 minutes, and he had not opened a single file. His coffee was cold. His phone had buzzed 11 times, and he had answered none of them. He was looking out the window at the city below, and he was hearing a sentence that an 8-year-old girl had said to him in the rain on the side of a road, and he could not make it stop. People with big cars are either very important or very lost. He turned away from the window. He opened his laptop. He closed it. He stood up and walked to the glass wall and put his hand flat against it and looked down at the streets 22 stories below where people moved in their ordinary patterns, small from this height abstract. He had spent 30 years building himself to this altitude. He had built it deliberately floor by floor, deal by deal, each one designed to take him further from the ground level where he had started. The ground level. He did not think about the ground level. He had trained himself not to think about it the way you train yourself not to touch a wound. You build scar tissue. You build floors. You build glass walls. You build a desk the size of a small car, and you sit behind it and you make decisions that affect the ground level without having to see it up close. But this morning, the glass was not working. Something had come through it. He sat back down. The memory came the way certain memories come when a door has been opened that was not meant to be opened, not gradually, all at once. He was 9 years old. He was standing in the kitchen of the apartment on Greystone and Birch. The refrigerator was open because he had opened it for the 4th time that evening, as if something might have appeared inside it since the last time he looked. Nothing had appeared. The shelves were empty. Not almost empty. Empty. The specific empty of a refrigerator that has not been filled in 11 days. His mother had been dead for 3 weeks. His father had been gone for 2 years before that. He was living in the apartment alone because no one had come to check yet and because he had learned to be quiet about the things that were missing. He had learned this from his mother, who had been quiet about things that were missing for as long as he had known her. His stomach made a sound that was not hunger exactly. It was past hunger. It was the body's specific negotiation with absence, the stage where the stomach stops asking and starts informing. A tightness behind the ribs, a cold feeling in the hands. He closed the refrigerator. He went to bed. He did not sleep. He waited for morning, because morning meant school, and school meant breakfast. He arrived at the cafeteria at 7:12. Breakfast started at 7:15. He was always first in line. He held his tray with both hands, and his hands shook slightly, and he did not look at the other children, because looking at the other children meant seeing their trays full and knowing the difference between a full tray and what he would receive. But then there were the hands, large hands, dry, warm. A woman behind the counter who looked at him and did not ask why he was first every morning, and did not ask where his mother was, and did not ask anything at all. She put food on his tray. She put more food on his tray than the posted portions allowed. An extra scoop of eggs. A second biscuit placed at the edge where the tray curved up, placed without comment. Placed the way you place something when you want the act to be invisible, but the result to be seen. She called him baby. Not his name. Baby. In the low, easy way that certain women say it, where it is not a diminishment, but a shelter. She said it every morning. Here you go, baby. And every morning for 3 years, from the time his mother died until the time he left for the group home, that word and those hands were the closest thing he had to being held. He did not remember her name. He had never asked. He remembered her hands. He remembered the extra biscuit. He remembered the specific temperature of the tray when she handed it to him still warm, the warmth transferring through the plastic into his cold fingers. He sat in his office on the 22nd floor, and his hands were flat on the desk, and they were not shaking, but something behind them was. He opened his laptop again. He typed into the search bar slowly, one letter at a time, like a man approaching something he was not sure he wanted to find. Greystone Neighborhood History. He pressed enter. He did not know what he was looking for. But something had started, and it was not the kind of thing that stopped because you closed the laptop. He did not close the laptop. He told his assistant to cancel the afternoon. He told Jerome to bring the car around. He did not say where they were going. Jerome did not ask. The car turned onto Greystone Road at 2:17 in the afternoon. The rain had stopped, but everything was still wet. The streets had that specific look they have after rain, darker, shinier, the edges of things more visible. Harrison told Jerome to park at the end of the block. He said he was surveying the project site. Jerome pulled to the curb, and Harrison got out alone. He had not stood on this street in 35 years. He had driven through the area. He had looked at it on maps. He had reviewed the property assessments when the Greystone project first crossed his desk. But he had not stood here. Not with his feet on this particular concrete. Not breathing this particular air. The street had changed, and had not changed in the way streets change when decades pass, but the bones remain. The houses were smaller than he remembered, or he was larger. The trees that lined the block had grown thick and old, and they reached across the road toward each other the way trees do when they have been given enough time to claim the space above them. A woman was sitting on her front porch, 2 houses down, shelling beans into a bowl. She looked at him and looked away. He was not from here. That was visible. He walked, slowly. His shoes were wrong for this. The Italian leather from this morning, the hand-stitched soles making a sound on the cracked sidewalk that did not belong to this neighborhood. He could hear his own footsteps, and they sounded foreign to him, like someone else's shoes on someone else's street. He passed a yard where 2 boys were kicking a soccer ball against a chain-link fence. The ball hit the fence with a rhythmic clanging that he remembered from childhood, the specific sound of a ball on chain link, the soundtrack of every afternoon he had spent on this block. Music came from an open window somewhere. Not loud, just present. The way music is present in neighborhoods where people leave their windows open because the air outside is preferable to the silence inside. He stopped in front of a house on the corner of Greystone and Birch. It was not the same house. The siding was different. The color was different. Someone had added a room on the left side and put up new gutters. But the front steps were the same. 3 concrete steps with the crack on the second one running diagonally from left to right. He had sat on these steps. He had tied his shoes on these steps. His mother had stood at the top of these steps and watched him walk to school, and he had looked back once at the corner, and she had been standing there with her hand up, not waving, exactly just raised, like a signal that she was still there. That was the image. That was the one that lived closest to the surface. He stood in front of the house for 10 seconds. He did not step toward it. It was not his house anymore. It had not been his house since before the people living in it now had probably been born. But the steps were the same, and his body remembered them, even if nothing else did. He looked down at his shoes on the cracked sidewalk. Polished leather on broken concrete. He looked like what he was. A man who had left and built a life so far from this sidewalk that standing on it now felt like standing in a foreign country. Except, it was not a foreign country. It was the country he had come from. And that was worse. He kept walking, 4 blocks east the school. Greystone Elementary was still standing, smaller than he remembered. A single-story building with a flat roof and a front entrance that had been painted since his time blue. Now, instead of the green, he remembered but the same shape, the same proportions, the same chain-link fence around the playground, where he had spent recesses standing near the wall because the other children had lunch in their stomachs, and he had only the cafeteria breakfast, and by noon it was gone and running took energy he could not spare. He walked to the front entrance. The door was propped open with a rubber wedge. The hallway inside smelled the way school hallways smell. Cleaning solution and paper and the specific warmth of a building full of children. He went to the front office. A woman behind the desk looked up at him over her glasses. He said he was a former student. He said he had attended Greystone Elementary 35 years ago. He said he was in the area and wanted to see the building. He said all of this in the measured voice he used in meetings. The voice that was designed to sound reasonable and unthreatening, and that contained no information about the fact that his hands were not entirely steady. She smiled. She said he was welcome to walk the hallway. The students were in afternoon classes. He should just keep his voice down. He walked the hallway slowly. The walls were covered in what school walls are always covered in: student artwork, announcements, a bulletin board about the fall reading challenge, class photographs in black frames. He stopped at each one without knowing why. Looking at faces he did not recognize, reading names he had never heard. Then he reached the far end of the hallway, where the corridor turned toward the cafeteria. On the wall between the double doors and the fire extinguisher, there was a wooden plaque. It was not large, maybe 2 feet by 1 foot. The wood was dark, and the letters were gold, and the overhead fluorescent light caught the surface in a way that made the letters stand out sharply against the grain. It read, Lorraine Okafor, 28 years of service, cafeteria staff, and beneath the name, in smaller italicized lettering, a quote, "Every child deserves a full plate." Harrison read the name. He read it again. Okafor. He stood in the hallway, and the name moved through him the way a current moves through water. Okafor. The woman this morning. The woman in the rain. The coat too big, the shoes worn through, the girl who had said her grandmother was smart. Her grandmother was. Past tense. He knew that name. He did not know how he knew it, and then he did. The hands, the extra biscuit. The word baby spoken in a low voice every morning for 3 years while a boy held a tray and tried not to shake. The woman whose name he had never asked, because when you are 9 years old and starving, you do not ask names. You just hold out your tray, and you take what is given, and you say thank you, and you survive. He reached out and touched the plaque. His fingers rested on the letters of her name. The wood was smooth and cool under his hand. 28 years of service. 28 years of standing behind a counter and filling trays. 28 years of looking at children and knowing which ones were hungry and doing something about it without being asked and without requiring gratitude. He turned to the woman at the front desk. His voice was different now. It had dropped below the register he used in meetings into something older, something that came from the part of him that still remembered holding a tray. He said, "The woman on this plaque, Lorraine Okafor. Is she still alive?" The woman's face softened. She shook her head. "Miss Lorraine passed about 4 years ago. Heart failure. She worked here until nearly the end." She paused. "Her granddaughter works here now, actually. In the cafeteria. Same position. Evelyn." Harrison heard the name, and the hallway seemed to narrow. Evelyn. The woman in the rain. The woman with 2 children and a coat too large and shoes that let the water in. The woman whose grandmother had fed him every morning for 3 years and had never told him her name and had put an extra biscuit on his tray every single day, as if the act itself were as ordinary as breathing. He put his hand on the wall. He needed something solid. The ground beneath him had started to shift in a way that he understood was not going to stop. He left the school. He got back in the car. He did not tell Jerome where to go. He sat in the back seat, and he thought about a name on a plaque in a hallway, and a woman he had never thanked, and a granddaughter he had splashed with mud that morning from the back of a car that cost more than the woman on the plaque had, probably earned in a decade. He took out his phone. He made one call. Not to Reginald, not to the office. He called a number he had not used in years. A man answered. Mr. Wendell had been the principal of Greystone Elementary for 22 years. He had retired 9 years ago. He was 78 now, and he lived 4 blocks from the school in the same house he had lived in for 40 years, because he was the kind of man who believed that the people who serve a community should stay in it. He answered the phone the way old men answer phones, slowly, with the specific patience of someone who has stopped hurrying because hurrying was never the point. Harrison said who he was. He said his real name, not the name on the buildings. The name he had used when he was a student at Greystone Elementary 35 years ago. There was a pause, a long one. Then Mr. Wendell said, I remember you. You were the boy who was always first in line. Harrison drove to his house. Jerome waited in the car. Mr. Wendell opened the door and looked at Harrison for a long time before stepping aside to let him in. The house was small, clean, orderly, books on every surface. A framed photograph of the school staff on the wall near the kitchen, taken sometime in the 1990s. Harrison looked at it and found her immediately. Third row second from the left. A woman, small in stature, upright, white-haired, even then, looking at the camera with the expression of someone who had work to do and was pausing briefly to allow a photograph and would be returning to the work shortly. Mr. Wendell sat in his armchair. Harrison sat across from him on the couch. The couch was low and soft, and it put Harrison below Mr. Wendell's eye line, which felt correct for reasons he could not articulate. Mr. Wendell said, "You are here about Lorraine." Harrison said, "I saw the plaque at the school. I did not know her name. I never asked her name." His voice cracked on the word asked. He did not try to fix it. Mr. Wendell nodded. He was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke. He said Lorraine Okafor had worked in that cafeteria for 28 years. She had started when she was 31, and she had retired when she was 59, and she had gone back as a volunteer 3 days a week until her health would not allow it anymore. He said she had fed more children than she could count, but he said she had not just fed them. He said that in 1991, when Harrison's mother died, Lorraine had noticed that the boy who was always first in line had stopped talking. He came to school early. He sat alone. He did not play at recess. He ate everything on his tray and looked at the empty plate the way you look at something that has just ended. Lorraine had gone to Mr. Wendell. She had told him the boy's mother was dead and his father was gone and nobody was coming for him, and that if they did not do something he would end up in a group home by the end of the month. Mr. Wendell said, "I told her there was nothing I could do officially. The system had its process." She looked at me and she said, "Then I will do it unofficially." He said Lorraine had found a scholarship program, a private fund for children from underprivileged backgrounds that provided full tuition to a boarding preparatory school upstate. The application required transcripts, a personal statement, and 2 letters of recommendation. Lorraine had gathered the transcripts from the school office. She had written the personal statement herself, sitting at her kitchen table at night, after her own grandchildren were asleep, writing in careful handwriting about a boy she believed in. She had asked Mr. Wendell to write 1 letter of recommendation. She had written the other herself. Mr. Wendell paused. He said she was a cafeteria worker. She had a 9th grade education. She wrote a letter of recommendation to a prep school admissions board, and she wrote it so well that they called me to ask about her, because they said whoever wrote it understood that child better than most teachers they had heard from. Harrison's hands were on his knees. They had closed into fists without his permission. He was looking at the floor. Mr. Wendell continued. He said the application was accepted. He said the scholarship was granted. He said that when the letter arrived at the school, addressed to Harrison, Lorraine had given it to Mr. Wendell to put in the boy's file so that it would look like it had come through official channels. She did not want Harrison to know it was her. She did not want anyone to know. Mr. Wendell said, "I asked her why. Why not tell the boy? Why not at least let him say thank you?" He paused and his old eyes were steady. She said, "That boy is going to be somebody. I am just clearing the road. He does not need to know who held the broom." Harrison did not speak. The room was quiet. Somewhere outside a dog barked. A car passed. The ordinary sounds of a Tuesday afternoon in a neighborhood where people lived their ordinary lives. Mr. Wendell said something else then. He said Lorraine was not the only one. He said that in every neighborhood like Greystone, in every community that had been under-resourced and overlooked and written off on city planning maps as blight, there were women like Lorraine. Women who worked invisible jobs, cafeteria staff, bus drivers, church secretaries, crossing guards. Women who held communities together, not because anyone asked them to, but because they understood that if they did not, nobody would. He said, this labor was never counted in any economic report. It was never acknowledged in any city council meeting. It was never named, but it was the reason that children, like Harrison, survived. It was the infrastructure that no one built, but everyone depended on. He said Lorraine Okafor saved more children than I ever did as principal. I had the title, she had the hands. Harrison looked up from the floor. His eyes were wet, but the tears had not fallen. They sat at the edges the way tears sit when a man has spent decades deciding that they are not permitted. He said, "She died 4 years ago." Mr. Wendell nodded. Heart gave out. She worked until 3 weeks before the end. Her granddaughter found her in the kitchen. She had been making lunches for the church food drive. Harrison sat with this. A woman who had saved his life had died making lunches. The symmetry of it was almost too precise to bear. Mr. Wendell said one more thing. He said it quietly, the way you say things that have been kept for a long time and are being released carefully. She kept a letter. She wrote it to you, but she never sent it. She told me she was waiting for the right time. The right time never came. When she died, her granddaughter found it in a drawer, but there was no name on the envelope. Just a line. It said, "For the boy," who kept coming back. Her granddaughter did not know who it was for. As far as I know, she still has it. Jerome drove without being told where to go. He circled the block once, then pulled to the curb on a quiet street 2 blocks from Mr. Wendell's house and put the car in park. He did not turn around. He did not ask. He sat in the front seat, and he was silent, and the engine idled, and the city moved outside the windows in its ordinary Tuesday way, indifferent to whatever was happening in the back seat. Harrison sat with his hands on his knees. His hands were shaking. He noticed this the way you notice something happening to someone else. He looked at his right hand and watched it tremble against the fabric of his suit pants, and he thought, "That is my hand, and it is shaking, and I cannot make it stop." He did the math. He did it slowly because the math was simple, and the simplicity of it was what made it unbearable. Everything he had began with a scholarship. The scholarship began with a letter written at a kitchen table by a woman with a 9th-grade education who worked in a school cafeteria. That woman was Lorraine Okafor. Lorraine Okafor was the grandmother of Evelyn Okafor. Evelyn Okafor lived in Lorraine Okafor's house on Greystone Road. Greystone Road was the site of a commercial development project owned by Devereaux Capital Development. Devereaux Capital Development was his company. His company was about to demolish 42 homes, including the home of the woman whose grandmother had made his entire life possible. The math was simple. The math was devastating. He had built an empire on a foundation that someone else had laid. He had built it, and he had never gone back to see the foundation. He had never asked who poured it. He had never even looked down. He had looked up, only up, for 35 years, building floor after floor after floor, and the whole time the woman who had put the first brick in place was 4 miles away serving breakfast to other children, and he had not known her name. And now she was dead. And now her granddaughter was walking to school in the rain with shoes that leaked. And now his company was about to turn the house where that woman had lived into a parking structure for a shopping complex that would serve people who had never set foot in this neighborhood and never would. He said it out loud. In the empty back seat of the Mercedes with the engine idling and Jerome's eyes carefully not looking in the mirror, he said, "What have I done?" Not a question. The sentence had no upward inflection. It landed flat in the leather interior and stayed there the way things stay when they are true. Outside the car, a school bus passed. A woman walked a dog. 2 men stood on a corner talking, with their hands in their pockets. The city breathing in and out. None of it knew. None of it cared. And that was correct, because the city does not organize itself around any one person's reckoning, no matter how overdue. He sat in the car for 11 minutes. Then he said, "Jerome, take me to Greystone and Maple." Jerome put the car in drive without a word. Evelyn opened the door and recognized him immediately. The man from this morning, the suit, the car, the apology on the side of the road. She stood in the doorway with one hand on the frame, and her expression was not hostile, but it was not open. It was the face of a woman who has had a long day and is standing in her doorway looking at a man she did not expect and did not invite, and is waiting for the explanation before deciding how much of it to allow inside. She said, "What do you want now?" Harrison stood on the porch. He had not planned what to say. He had driven across the city with a sentence forming in his chest that was not yet words, and now he was here, and the sentence was still not words, and the woman in the doorway was waiting. He said, "I need to tell you something about your grandmother." Evelyn's hand tightened on the doorframe, almost imperceptibly, the way hands tighten when a name is spoken that belongs to someone you love and have lost and are still in the process of losing, because grief does not end. It just changes shape. She did not invite him in. She did not close the door. She stood in the threshold, and she waited, he told her. Standing on her porch, still in the suit from this morning, though it had been rained on and sat in, and wrinkled in ways that would have bothered him 6 hours ago and did not bother him now. He told her he had gone to school at Greystone Elementary. He told her he had been 9 years old when his mother died, and that he had been alone, and that every morning he had gone to the cafeteria and a woman had fed him. He told her the woman had given him extra food and called him baby, and never asked him a single question about where he came from or why he was always first in line. He told her the woman was her grandmother. Evelyn listened. Her face did not move. She listened the way people listen when the thing being said is rearranging something inside them, and they need to be still for the rearrangement to happen. He told her about the scholarship, about Mr. Wendell, about the letter of recommendation written at a kitchen table. He told her everything he had learned in the past 3 hours about a woman he had never thanked. When he finished, Evelyn was quiet for a long time. Then she stepped back from the doorway. Not a word, just the step. The space she made was enough for him to enter, and he understood the invitation, and he walked inside. The house was small. He knew this. He had seen it from the outside 100 times in project files labeled Greystone Block Property 41, but standing inside it was different from seeing it on a page. The ceilings were low. The walls were painted a pale yellow that had softened with age into something closer to cream. Everything was old, and everything was clean, and everything was arranged with the specific care of a person who has few things and treats each of them as if it matters because it does. On the kitchen counter, 3 bowls stacked neatly beside the dish rack, 3 spoons standing upright in a small ceramic cup, 3, not 4, not 2, 3. The exact number of people who lived in this house. Nothing extra, nothing missing. Harrison looked at those 3 spoons longer than he should have. He did not know why they affected him the way they did, except that they were precise, and the precision said something about the life being lived here that no amount of words could have said as clearly. Evelyn led him to the front room. It was small, maybe 10 feet by 12. A couch, a chair, a television that was not large and not new. On the walls, photographs. Miss Lorraine in what looked like a church hall, smiling, standing behind a table covered in food. Evelyn, as a child, maybe 4 or 5, sitting on a woman's lap that had to be Lorraine's, Amara and Tobias in school clothes, standing in front of this house. And on the wall beside the window in a simple black frame, a piece of paper. Not a photograph, not a certificate. A piece of lined paper torn carefully from a notebook, and on it written in handwriting that was deliberate and steady, a single sentence. Every child deserves a full plate. Lorraine Okafor. Evelyn had framed her grandmother's handwriting and hung it on the wall of her living room, like other people hang diplomas or awards. Harrison looked at it. He looked at it for a long time. He did not say anything because there was nothing to say that would have been adequate. Evelyn watched him looking at it. Then she said, "Wait here." She left the room. He heard her footsteps on the stairs, then above him, moving across the upstairs floor. A drawer opening, footsteps returning. She came back, holding an envelope. It was old. The paper had yellowed at the edges. It was not sealed. The flap was tucked in the way you tuck a flap when you have finished writing something, but have not yet decided to send it. She held it out to him. She said, "I found this in her desk after she passed. I do not know who it is for. There is no name on it. Just this." She turned the envelope over. On the front, in the same careful handwriting as the framed sentence on the wall, it said, "For the boy who kept coming back." Harrison took the envelope. His hands were shaking again. He was aware of this, and he did not try to hide it, because hiding it would have required energy he did not have. He held the envelope the way you hold something that has been waiting for you longer than you have been looking for it. He opened the flap. The letter was 2 pages, written on the same kind of lined paper. The handwriting was steady through most of it, but toward the end it became slightly less, even as if the hand that wrote it was tired, or the thing being written was heavy enough to make steadiness difficult. He read it. He read it slowly. The letter was a conversation from a woman to a boy she had never stopped thinking about. She wrote that she had watched him from a distance for many years. She wrote that she knew what he had built, and she was proud of it, the way you are proud of something you helped plant, even if no one knows you were the one who put the seed in the ground. She wrote that she did not need him to come back for her. She did not need a thank you or a recognition or any of the things people give when they discover they have been helped. She wrote that what she needed was simpler and harder. She needed him to remember that the road he had walked did not begin with him. It began with the people who cleared it, and the only payment that mattered was not the payment you made backward. It was the payment you made forward, to the next child, standing in a cafeteria line with shaking hands, to the next family living in a house that someone with power had decided was worth less than what could be built on top of it. He finished reading. He folded the letter along its original creases. He placed it back in the envelope. He held it on his knee with both hands, and he sat there in the small front room of a house he was scheduled to demolish, and he did not speak. Evelyn was sitting across from him in the chair by the window. She had been watching him read the way you watch someone encounter something that changes them, without interrupting, without performing comfort, just present. She saw his hands. She saw the shaking. She did not comment on it. After a long time, he said, "Did she ever mention me?" Evelyn said. "She mentioned a boy she helped. She never said his name. She said the name was not important." She paused. "She said what mattered was what the boy did with what he was given." The sentence landed in the room, and it stayed there between them with the weight of everything it carried. What the boy did with what he was given. Harrison looked at the envelope on his knee. He looked at the 3 spoons in the kitchen. He looked at the framed handwriting on the wall. He looked at this woman sitting across from him in a house that contained everything and nothing. At the same time, the granddaughter of the woman who had made his life possible, living on the exact ground he was about to erase. He did not speak again for a long time. Evelyn did not ask him to. The house was quiet. Outside, the afternoon moved on. Somewhere on the block, children were coming home from school. The sound of their voices carried through the walls the way children's voices do, bright and unaware of anything that does not directly involve them. Harrison held the letter. His hands had stopped shaking. Something had settled in him. Not peace. Something closer to clarity. The specific clarity that comes when you have been looking at a map upside down for 35 years and someone has just turned it around. He was back in his office by 4:30. He placed the envelope on his desk. He placed it in the center, directly under the light, where the yellowed paper caught the overhead fluorescent and the handwriting was visible even from across the room. For the boy who kept coming back, he looked at it for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and called Reginald. Reginald Pace came through the door 7 minutes later. He was a man who moved quickly because quickness was currency in their business, and because he had never met a problem he could not solve if he arrived at it fast enough. He sat down across from Harrison's desk without being invited, because that was the kind of relationship they had. 23 years, built on deals and handshakes and the mutual understanding that sentiment was something other people had. Harrison said the Greystone project is canceled. Reginald did not move. His face did the thing it did when information arrived that did not fit the architecture of his expectations. A brief stillness followed by recalibration. He said. "Which part?" Harrison said. "All of it. The demolition, the commercial development, the buyer agreements, all of it." Reginald leaned forward. He said, "Harrison, that is $120 million project. We have contracts. We have investors with commitments on paper. The city planning office approved the rezoning 3 weeks ago. We cannot just cancel." Harrison said, "We can. I am telling you we are." Reginald tried the first lever. The money. He walked through the numbers with the specific precision of a man who has spent his career making things that are complicated sound simple. The penalty clauses, the investor withdrawal fees, the sunk costs on surveying and permits. He put the total somewhere around 14 million in losses if they pulled out now. He said this number, the way you say a number you expect, to be decisive. Harrison said, I will cover it personally. Reginald tried the second lever. The reputation. He said the development community would talk. He said pulling out of a city-approved project without explanation would make them look erratic. He said the word erratic, the way people in business say words they want to land with weight. Harrison said nothing. Reginald tried the third lever. He said, Harrison, those properties are designated blight. The city wants them gone. The residents have been offered relocation packages. This is urban renewal. This is what we do. We take underperforming land, and we turn it into something productive. He said the word productive, the way he always said it, with the specific confidence of a man who has never had to ask who defines what is productive and who pays when the definition changes. Harrison looked at him. He said 42 families live on that block. They are not underperforming land. They are people. Reginald said, This is business, Harrison. It is not personal. Harrison said, It became personal this morning. Reginald looked at the envelope on the desk. He looked at Harrison's face. He was reading the room the way he always read rooms, quickly and accurately. And what he read now was something he had not seen before in 23 years. He was looking at a man who had already made a decision and who was not going to unmake it regardless of what numbers or arguments or levers were applied. He tried one more time. He said, You are making an emotional decision. You are going to regret this in a week. Harrison said, Cancel the project. Find another site. Relocate the commercial development to the industrial corridor on the west side where we already own parcels. I will cover every penalty cost. I will handle the investors. This is not a discussion. Reginald stood up. He buttoned his jacket the way men button their jackets when they are leaving a room they did not expect to lose in. He said, I have known you for 23 years. This is the first time I do not understand what you are doing, Harrison said. That is because this is the first time I understand what I am doing. Reginald left. The door closed behind him. Harrison sat alone in his office on the 22nd floor. The city was beginning to turn on its evening lights outside the glass walls. The buildings he had built or financed becoming shapes against the darkening sky. He looked at the envelope. He picked it up and held it the way he had held it in Evelyn's front room, with both hands, carefully, as if the paper itself were alive. He said, Quiet to no one, to the empty room, to the woman who had written the letter and had never sent it and had died in her kitchen making lunches for a church food drive. I am clearing the road. He went home. He changed out of his suit. He put on a pair of dark pants and a plain shirt and a jacket that had no label visible on the outside and shoes that were leather but not polished. Not today, not for this. He told Jerome he would drive himself. He had not driven himself anywhere in 4 years. He took the car out of the garage and he drove east. He parked at the end of Greystone Road and walked. The streetlights were on. The rain had not come back, but the air was still damp, and the puddles from the morning were still in the low places along the edges where the asphalt met the mud. His shoes found them. He did not avoid them. Evelyn opened the door. She was wearing what she wore at home, a sweatshirt and jeans, and her hair pulled back. She looked at him on her porch in his plain clothes, and she looked different than she had this afternoon when he was in his suit. She looked at him the way you look at someone who has returned for a reason you are not yet sure of but are willing to hear. She let him in. They sat in the kitchen. The table was small wood scratched from years of use, 2 chairs. She pulled a third from against the wall. He sat in the chair she gave him, and it was low, and the table was at a different height than the tables he was used to, and he felt for the first time in this entire day like he was the right size for the room he was in. He told her. He said, I canceled the project. The demolition, the commercial development, all of it. This house is not being touched. This block is not being touched. None of it. Evelyn sat across from him. She did not react the way he might have expected. She did not thank him. She did not express relief or gratitude or any of the things that people in his world expressed when they received something they wanted. She sat with it. She processed it the way she processed everything carefully, with the specific patience of someone who has learned that good news requires the same caution as bad news because both can change shape when you look at them too closely. She said, "Why?" He said, "Because I grew up on this block. Because your grandmother saved my life when I was 9 years old and I did not know it until today. Because I built everything I have on a foundation she laid, and I came back to tear it down." He paused. "I owed your grandmother everything. I paid her back by almost destroying the only thing she left behind." The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere in the house a clock ticked. Evelyn said, "She would not have wanted you to feel guilty." She said it evenly, without comfort and without accusation. A statement of fact from someone who had known the woman being discussed. "She would have wanted you to do something." He looked at her across the small table. She looked back, and between them in the kitchen of a house that had been scheduled for demolition 12 hours ago, something shifted, not dramatically. Nothing collapsed or opened or transformed in the way that things transform in stories that are trying too hard. It was quieter than that. It was the specific shift that happens when two people who began the day as strangers discover that they have been connected by someone neither of them fully understood and who is no longer alive to explain it. A door opened down the hallway. Small footsteps on the hardwood. Tobias appeared in the kitchen doorway in his pajamas, holding a stuffed animal by one ear. He looked at Harrison with the direct, unguarded stare of a 5-year-old who has not yet learned that staring at strangers is considered impolite. He said, "Are you the mud man?" Harrison looked at him. Then he looked down at his shoes. They were covered in mud from the walk up Greystone Road. The same road. The same mud. He looked at Tobias, and something moved across his face that was not quite a smile, but was in the same neighborhood. He said, "Yes, I am the mud man." Tobias considered this. He said, "Amara said your car splashed us." Harrison said, "It did. I am sorry about that." Tobias said, "It is okay. I like mud." Then he turned and went back down the hallway with his stuffed animal, and the conversation was over because 5-year-olds do not linger on topics that have been resolved. Evelyn looked at Harrison. The smallest change in her face, not a smile. Something before a smile, the earliest form of it. He came back 3 days later. This time he came with a proposal, not a business proposal, a question. He sat at the same small table in the same kitchen, and he asked Evelyn if she would be willing to stand beside him at a community meeting. He said he wanted to present a plan to the residents of Greystone. Not the demolition plan. Something else. A renovation plan. A restoration. Houses repaired, not replaced. Infrastructure upgraded from inside the community, not imposed from outside. He said he did not know how to do this. He said he had spent 35 years building things over places, and he wanted to try building things within one. He said he needed someone who understood the neighborhood to help him do it right. Evelyn said, "Why me?" he said. "Because your grandmother fed every child who walked through that cafeteria for 28 years, and you are doing the same thing right now in the same building, and I think the person who should help decide what happens to this neighborhood is someone who never left it." The meeting was held on a Thursday evening in the basement of Greater Hope Baptist Church, 4 blocks from the school. 31 people came. Most of them had lived on Greystone their entire lives. They sat in folding chairs arranged in a semicircle. Some had brought coffee. One woman had brought pound cake. The room smelled like church basements smell everywhere. Old carpet and candle wax, and the specific warmth of a space that has held a lot of gatherings. Harrison stood at the front. He was not wearing a suit. He was wearing the same plain clothes he had worn to Evelyn's kitchen. Evelyn stood beside him. Not behind him, not to the side. Beside him, at the same level. He said, "My name is Harrison Devereaux. I run a company called Devereaux Capital Development. 3 weeks ago, my company signed demolition permits for every house on this block." He paused. The room was very still. "I grew up on this block. My mother walked me to school on these streets. A woman named Lorraine Okafor fed me breakfast every morning for 3 years at the Greystone Elementary cafeteria when I had nothing to eat. I left. I did not come back. That was wrong. I am here now, and I am not leaving. The room did not applaud. The room did what rooms do when they have heard promises before from men in positions of power. It waited. A woman in the second row, small, white-haired, with the posture of someone who has spent 70 years refusing to shrink, said, "We have heard promises before. Last time someone came in here talking about renewal, they put up a parking lot where Miss Thelma's house used to be." A man near the back said, "You are 35 years late." Harrison said, "You are right. I am late. But I am here, and I am not asking you to trust me. I am asking you to tell me what this neighborhood needs and to hold me to it." The room shifted, not agreement. Not yet, but the specific shift that happens when skepticism encounters sincerity and decides to keep listening. Evelyn spoke then. She did not speak for Harrison. She spoke for the room. She said, "This is not charity. This is accountability. He owes this neighborhood a debt that is older than most of us knew about. I am standing here because my grandmother believed that when someone owes you something, you do not let them forget it. You make sure they pay it right." The room understood this. A woman in the third row nodded. A man uncrossed his arms. The conversation that followed was not easy, and it was not quick, and it did not end with everyone satisfied. But it began. And beginning was what mattered. They sat on the front steps after the meeting. The church had emptied out. The street was quiet, the way streets get in the early evening when the day has used up most of its noise, and what remains is the specific hum of a neighborhood settling into itself. Somewhere 2 blocks over, someone was playing music. Not loud, just present. The kind of sound that belongs to a place and does not need to explain itself. The air smelled like November after rain. Damp earth and cooling concrete, and the faint sweetness of whatever was blooming in the yard next door despite the season. The sky was doing what it does in this part of the country in the late afternoon, going from blue to gold to something deeper that does not have a name, but that everyone who has ever sat on a porch at this hour recognizes. Evelyn said, "She worked until the last week, my grandmother. She got up every morning and she went to that cafeteria and she served those children breakfast. 3 weeks before she died, she was still putting extra food on trays. The doctors told her to stop. She said stopping was not something she knew how to do." Harrison listened. He was looking at the street, at the cracked sidewalk, at the puddles that were still there from this morning, smaller now drying at the edges. Evelyn said, "The last thing she told me was about this neighborhood. She said, 'Don't let them tell you this neighborhood is nothing. This neighborhood made everybody who ever left it.'" The sentence sat between them on the steps. Harrison was quiet for a long time. Then he said something he had never said to anyone. He said, "My mother worked 3 jobs. She cleaned offices at night. She worked at a laundry during the day. On weekends, she did alterations for a woman on the west side who paid her in cash and never learned her name." He paused. "She did not have health insurance. She did not see a doctor. She wore her body out for me the way you wear out a machine by running it without maintenance until something breaks that cannot be fixed." He looked at his hands. "She died at 29. And I repaid her by pretending I came from nowhere, by building a story where I was self-made, where everything I had was the result of my own intelligence and my own effort and my own decisions. I erased her. I erased your grandmother. I erased this entire neighborhood from the version of myself I showed the world, because the truth was not a story that made me look the way I wanted to look." The evening came down around them. The streetlights turned on one at a time, the way streetlights do in old neighborhoods where the timers are not synchronized. The music from 2 blocks over changed to something slower. Evelyn said, "No one is self-made. That is the lie successful people tell so they do not have to say thank you." Harrison looked at her. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the street, at the block, at the houses that were still standing because of a decision made 12 hours ago that had started with a puddle. He looked down at his shoes. They were covered in mud. The same brown mud that had been on Evelyn's coat that morning. The same mud from the same street. His shoes looked like her shoes had looked at 6:30 in the morning when she was walking her children to school, and his car had driven past without stopping. They did not look like a billionaire's shoes anymore. They looked like shoes that belonged to this street. He did not wipe them. 6 months later, on a Tuesday morning in May, Evelyn walked her children to school. The route was the same. The street was the same, but the sidewalk was new. Poured concrete, smooth and level, running the full length of Greystone Road from Maple to the school entrance. A sidewalk. The kind of thing that exists in other neighborhoods without anyone noticing, and that had not existed here for as long as anyone could remember. Amara walked on the sidewalk with her backpack, which was new, though she had not asked for it. Tobias walked beside her, holding his mother's hand, stepping carefully on the lines between the concrete sections because he had decided that stepping on them was good luck, and stepping between them was bad luck, and this was a system he took seriously. The sun was out. It was not raining, but Amara had an umbrella in her backpack. She carried it every day, regardless of the forecast. Evelyn had asked her once why she brought it when the sky was clear. Amara had said Grandma always said be ready. Evelyn had not asked again. The houses on the block were being repaired. Not demolished. Not replaced. Repaired. New roofs on old frames. Updated wiring behind original walls. Plumbing that worked. Porches rebuilt with the same wood patterns as the ones that had been there before. The work was being done by crews, hired from the neighborhood, trained through a program that Harrison had funded, and that Evelyn had helped design, because she had insisted that the people who lived here should be the ones who rebuilt it. Evelyn still worked at the school cafeteria. She had been offered other positions. Harrison had offered to fund anything she wanted to do. She had said, I want to do what my grandmother did. I want to stand behind that counter and fill those trays. She said it without drama and without apology. And Harrison had understood that this was not a woman settling for less. This was a woman choosing the thing she believed in. The breakfast program at Greystone Elementary had been expanded. It now served every student, not just those on the free meal program. It was called the Lorraine Okafor Full Plate Program. The name was on a small sign outside the cafeteria entrance next to the plaque that had been there for years. Every child deserves a full plate. The sign and the plaque side by side. The woman and her legacy. The words she had lived by, and the name she had earned. Harrison walked through the neighborhood that morning. No car, no Jerome. He walked on the new sidewalk in a pair of ordinary shoes that were already collecting mud at the edges because the grass along Greystone Road was wet from the sprinklers that the city had finally installed after 30 years of head requests. He passed the house on the corner of Greystone and Maple. Evelyn's house. Miss Lorraine's house. There was a new sign on the porch. Small, tasteful, painted by one of the women from the church. It read, The Lorraine Okafor House. A community home. Below it in smaller letters, a place where everyone gets a full plate. He looked at the sign. He looked at the house. The paint was fresh. The porch had been rebuilt. The steps were new, but they had the same number of steps as before 3, because Evelyn had told the crew that 3 was the right number, and that some things should not change just because they can. He stood there for a moment. Then he kept walking. The city went on being the city. Cars and buses and people moving through their mornings with the specific urgency and indifference that mornings require. None of it paused for him. None of it needed to. Some debts are not paid with money. They are paid with presence, with the decision to stop driving past and start walking through. Now, before you go, I want to step outside the story for a moment. This story is fictional. Evelyn Harrison, Miss Lorraine, all of them are invented. The events did not happen, but the world they live in is real. Every year, in America, neighborhoods like Greystone are rezoned and demolished to make way for commercial developments that serve people who have never lived there. The families who built those neighborhoods, who swept those porches and walked those sidewalks and fed each other's children, are displaced. The process has a name. It is called gentrification, and it is happening right now in cities across this country. The women in this story, Miss Lorraine, Evelyn, are based on a truth that does not get told enough. In communities that have been under-resourced for generations, it is often women, black women, working invisible jobs, cafeteria workers, bus aides, church volunteers, crossing guards who hold everything together. Their labor is not counted in any economic report. It is not celebrated in any headline. But it is the reason children survive. It is the infrastructure no one builds, but everyone depends on. Organizations like the National Farm-to-School Network and Feeding America's school breakfast programs are doing real work to make sure children eat. Community land trusts across the country are fighting to keep neighborhoods in the hands of the people who built them. These are not fictional ideas. They are real and they are worth knowing about. I will tell you something personal. There was someone in my life who cleared the road for me. Someone who saw me before I was visible to anyone else, and who did something quiet and specific and never asked to be thanked for it. I did not thank them in time. That is something I carry. It is part of why I wrote this story. If there is someone in your life who cleared the road for you, someone who fed you, believed in you, or carried you when you could not carry yourself, tell me about them in the comments. And if you have not thanked them yet, maybe today is the day. See you in the next story.